welcome back to the White Coat Club. My name is Lindsay, and I am one of the counselors at Moon Prep. Today, I have Michaela with me, and we're going to be discussing whether or not it's a good idea to hire an independent counselor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michaela. I'm here during this podcast episode with Lindsay.
Perfect. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more BSMD and med school admission advice. Okay, so a lot of our new prospective calls that we talk to oftentimes ask us, like, if we have a school counselor, what's the point even of hiring like an independent college counselor? So I thought maybe we could establish first the difference between a school counselor and an independent college counselor. So
And
Michaela, when you were in like high school, what was your relationship like with your guidance counselor, your school counselor?
okay, so this was a long time ago, of course. I feel like I've been an independent college counselor longer than I was in high school itself. So it was a long time ago, but I honestly do not remember her name. I do remember that it was a woman, but I do not remember her name. I feel like at I went to a larger public high school in the middle of a city, and we truthfully maybe spoke once or twice a year to pick out classes, but she really didn't know my college plans or give me much guidance towards different colleges or picking a major. It was really just graduation requirements is what was being discussed in those meetings. And I don't think my parents ever met her as well. So I know this was a while ago, over 10 years, but I do talk to a lot of my students now, and their experiences, of course, range across the board because some people are at private high schools or big public schools like I was, but a lot of them have the same notes.
Yeah, I mean, that was exactly my experience. Yours might have been even a little bit like more hands-on than mine. I don't remember meeting her even, or I don't even remember what gender they were, to like pick college class or my high school classes. I think I did most of that on my own, but I could be misremembering. I did go to public high school. There's like maybe like 430 kids in my class, so like decent size, but we only had like one counselor for like the entire school is my memory. And so there was definitely no hand holding, no like real relationship building. My parents definitely never met them or met whoever it was. And, we were not close, that's for sure. And that's kind of the trend, I think, for a lot of high schools, like private high schools, exactly as you said, Michaela, a lot of those times will have like more of a dedicated person. They'll have like a smaller list. But I think like the national average of like student to counselor ratio is like one to like 300 to 400 students or something. So it's just really hard for them to make any meaningful relationships.
Yes, yes. And even the high school I went to was an IB high school, and there was one dedicated college counselor, guidance counselor for all of the IB students, which was like, I don't know, 250 students. So even though the IB students got their own counselor, it was just the one person to all of them.
Mm, yeah.
So I think that is the major difference between a school counselor and an independent college counselor is that your school guidance counselor is just going to have more students and also more roles to be accomplishing. So they are going to be likely people that are running or sitting in IEP meetings, and they're going to be doing also guidance counseling meetings in addition to college counseling. They're going to have a lot more meetings, different types of meetings, and just be pulled in different directions. Whereas an independent college counselor is dedicated only to helping you get into colleges, helping you smooth through the entire process, and they're dedicated to just college tasks with you.
Yeah. And I think that that's like one of the big pros of working with an independent college counselor is that they do have that dedicated time. So if you are relying on your school counselor or family friend or an English teacher, you're likely not going to be like their like the top priority for sure. Like you're kind of on their timeline of when they can get essays back to you. They might have a lot more responsibilities. And for a school counselor, like they're really only working, school hours. They might not be responding to your emails in the summer. They might not respond during school breaks and probably will not respond during school breaks. Weekends, kind of forget it. Whereas like an independent college counselor, like that's kind of like whenever we are working nights and weekends, and of course, like throughout the summer break with our students. So I think that like that's one of the big pros of a independent college counselor is you definitely do have a lot more like touch points with them.
And you also have that peace of mind knowing that you have an expert helping you, that you know this is their dedicated profession, that they know the ins and outs of what they're talking about, likely because you hired them because of a specific specialty that they have. So they are an expert in, the areas of college counseling that they're helping you with. And that just reduces family stress and tension overall, that there maybe isn't as many fights over the dinner table over the college list because you have a guiding hand, not someone that you are trying to get answers out of, but you can only meet with them in 2 weeks and something like that, that is very typical in a school counselor.
And I know I've had many parents who reach out who are having kind of these head-butting conversations with their child. And just like hearing, even if we're saying the exact same thing as the parent, hearing it come from someone else who isn't the parent sometimes just like makes the advice much better, if that makes sense. Like it just becomes I don't know if the student just like trusts us more. We don't have like that emotional baggage that comes with our advice too. It really helps to, I think, smooth out some of the process. Now, of course, we can't take over like the role of the parent in the process, but we can kind of take on some of like helping make those big decisions and helping to just like have that outside perspective that definitely does help to reduce some stress.
And I think part of that too is that students know their parents' backgrounds and the perspective of their parents. So when they're giving advice, like they know where that, experience and background is coming from to give them the advice on certain colleges or majors. So us having a different perspective coming from, you know, either a previous guidance counselor background or having gone through medical school or coming as an admissions counselor, a different professional perspective from the admissions world, that really sometimes does the trick, is even if it is backing up what the parents are saying or explaining something new to the parents that they might not have considered, and it is in support of what the student is saying, but at least both parties, the student and the parents, have more information than just their own research and opinions. They have that expert person there guiding them.
Yeah, I think that that's so key. Just having that expert on your team, that peace of mind, hopefully come into play, makes this process that's already really stressful, hopefully like a little less stressful. And Michaela and I were talking about this before the podcast and kind of racking our brains about what we thought might be the cons of hiring an independent college counselor. And I suppose like the only one we could really come up with, I just thought of another one actually, but the biggest one is it's more expensive, of course. Like you're paying for this person for their time. A school counselor, a family friend, a lot of times they're doing it because it's part of their job or like, out of the goodness of their heart. And so, of course, that doesn't really necessarily have a cost associated with it, but an independent college counselor will have various degrees of costs, and it just depends on, how much you want to spend on this process. I suppose the other con that I kind of thought of is just like finding the right fit for an independent college counselor. Like, I always tell this to our perspectives too, like, we could be great. We could be a really great counselor. We could make, dozens of families happy, but maybe like we're just not the right fit for you. Our communication style is a little bit different, like how we work, how we like to edit essays, whatever it might be a little bit off. And so that's what I always tell my like the prospective families when we're doing new client calls is the fit is really important and definitely something that at least at Moon Prep, if it's not the right fit on the first try, we can always shuffle around to make sure that we do find the right person for you.
That can be so hard for a family looking at a website and picking someone, because you don't know until you start working with them if they are going to be the right fit. Their editing style is going to match your child's, all these things. And so that's, yes, again, like Lindsay said, this is a big perk of a company like Moon Prep with the different counselors and mentors we have. We're guaranteed to find someone that matches your style. We will be flexible enough to make sure there is a right fit for you moving forward. We're not going to stick you with someone that you don't like. This is your one chance at these college admissions acceptances, and we want you to be happy the entire way through. So we're going to do what we can to make that happen. And just for some context, Lindsay and I do are part of the team that do these prospective family calls. So this is where we get a lot of these frequently asked questions. And I think that we have gotten many questions over the years, and we've compiled a little list of the smarter questions that we feel like we have been asked, that we love that the families are asking these questions, because we really know they've done their research, their homework, and that they're making sure that these counselors are the best fit for them. And I know one of the questions that I am asked in prospective meetings a lot that I love being able to answer is, what is our professional background before we became an independent college counselor? And I think this is a really smart question for families to ask in prospective meetings or when they're searching for an independent counselor, because knowing their professional background can really give you an idea on their perspective. So, for instance, I came from being a college admissions counselor. So, especially when students are asking me questions about choosing a major, or what does the right fit of a campus feel like? How do I know where it feels like home? I've had that experience of talking to students on campus that were searching for their right fit, and how did I help them find that, or what points helped them find their right fit? But also just looking at things from a college's perspective. How would a college, yes, you're writing this essay and it means a lot to you, but how is it going to be viewed from the college perspective? So always asking, independent college counselor what their professional background gives you some insight into how they're going to approach helping your child, as well as, what experience they can offer.
Yeah, and we have like some essay coaches and counselors who have like a medical school background. They're in medical school currently, they've graduated, whatever it might be. And so that can also be something that some people are looking for. And then some people like don't want to work with like a medical school student or a physician. And so you kind of see a little bit of both. And there's really no right or wrong way to go about doing this. I have some people who ask like, well, what's like the best way? And I think it kind of comes down to like whatever you might be interested in and like what kind of you're looking for in your counselor. And if you have no clue, we'll kind of advise you on who we think might be the best fit kind of personality wise too. I guess another thing to think about too is availability. Does it match yours? Because of course, like when you're an underclassman, like a freshman, sophomore, even a junior, there's not really as many time sensitive things. Summer programs, those are going to be like your most like deadline heavy timelines, like when you're applying to summer programs. But for the most part, you can meet on a Tuesday of like the beginning of the month or the middle of the month, and it's not really going to matter too much. For the most part, like, you have a lot of flexibility on timelines. You don't need something done immediately. Whereas whenever you're a senior, there's going to be last minute essays, or, not, hopefully not last minute essays. Hopefully they're working ahead, but, there is just going to be a lot of things that you have to do. And sometimes you do get like essays and have like a 2 week turnaround time that you have to do them on. So you want to make sure that that person is responsive and is able to go through like a couple drafts with you. So like, talking about availability, potentially like looking at like what time zones they're in, just to make sure that, if you are on Pacific time, and you have activities until 7 p.m., it might not make sense to work with someone who's on the East Coast if, they don't like working past 10 p.m. Eastern. So, just making sure that you have like those questions that are asked to make sure that someone does have that availability for you is really important.
And another question that I love it when families ask me, because it all really shows they've done their homework or maybe had a bad experience in the past or something, but it's how many students do they take on, especially in a certain academic year, because this will determine whether they will reliably be able to accommodate your students' needs along with their other students during those busy times. If they are taking on 40 seniors, that is going to be a lot of essays they have to get through, and you will likely very rarely be at the top of their list at any point. So, it's every single person, especially with their availability of how many hours they want to work per week can definitely vary. So there's not a perfect number you should be looking for, but if they are taking on a lot of students, just really consider the workload that's that's involved with all of these essays and applications. So it's just something to be mindful of, as well as what their essay turnaround time and email response time, because this is going to be really important when you're up against tight college deadlines and you might need multiple revisions over essays. But if they have a 1 week or 2 weeks turnaround time for a single essay, that's going to be very difficult to work far enough ahead to correctly space things out. And you're likely going to be submitting college applications that have not been looked at by a counselor.
And I'm gonna circle back to like, how many students they work with. Admin probably do put like limits on how many students each counselor or essay coach can work with, just because we want to make sure that you're not having to wait like 2 weeks to speak to someone. And it is something that we do take pretty seriously. And so a lot of parents will be like, oh, well, can you just take one more? And it might just seem like, oh, just one more student, especially as like a sophomore or a junior. It's like not that big of a deal, but come senior year, that's really whenever it does start to get really hectic for us too. And so it's a lot for the students, it's a lot for us, a lot of essays for BSMD. And so we do try and, take it really seriously. And, last year and we sold out, the year before that we sold out. So kind of once those spots are gone, they're gone. And, we don't really try and take on any more beyond like what we think we can handle too. And one thing that we always think people should look for is like what specialty, if you are looking for a particular specialty, do they have experience in that area? So for example, of course, at Moon Prep, we work a lot of like direct medical, BSMD, BSDMD, BSDO, like those types of things. And so a lot of those direct med programs. And so you might want to like look for someone in particular who has those types of experiences and figure out what their background is. Like there are a lot of companies out there that do work with like BSMD students, but is that like their specialty? Is that a lot of like time that they spend with them? That's definitely something to dive into and kind of get a better understanding of what their background is.
So kind of going into, again, a little bit back to like the difference between independent counselors and guidance counselors, we want to talk about what does an independent counselor work on with students. So just what is taking up those hours that you're signing up for originally? And I think one of the most important parts of that is, of course, the essays. The essays can be very time consuming. Kind of, I feel like if a student is not doing BSMD or direct medical programs, the average number of essays per school on their list is 2 or 3 essays. So right there, if they're applying to 20 schools, they could have 20 to 30 essays ahead of them. And then also, of course, direct medical programs, if that number jumps to like 5, 5 average per school on their list. So that is just something to be mindful of, is the essays take a big portion of the time.
Yeah, and I think another big thing that for independent college counselors, what they'll help with is just determining right fit for colleges and building a balanced college list. I know a lot of times whenever we get like the initial list from students, a lot of the times it's like packed with super reach schools like Duke and Harvard and Stanford and University of Chicago and Rice and places like that. All of those universities have got acceptance rates of 10% or less. And you can have great stats, but those schools are just tough to get into and they reject kids with great stats every year. And so, you might have 15 schools on your list, but if all of them have a 10% or less acceptance rate, who knows what you'll get accepted to. Or I've seen like a lot of kids will have like, the super reaches and then they'll have like their safety, like their in-state safety, but kind of missing that middle like match category because that one does seem to be like a little bit of going extinct and it is hard to find like really good match schools sometimes. It's either like super reaches or safeties, I feel like sometimes. And so just like helping the students find that in between of, figuring out a college that, maybe is a safety, but they are still really excited to go to, maybe not as exclusive as like a Duke, but still going to be like a really great place for them to complete their college goals and career goals and things like that. So that's, I think, a big part of what we work on too with students.
And then also resume building. There is so much that can be said from having an expert guiding you on what activities you should be building your resume towards, whether that's volunteering, shadowing, which clubs to join, and even guiding passion projects to really narrow down your interest and specialty that you want to project to these colleges. That is so important, just to have an expert who's been through many, rounds of application cycles to see what our college is looking for and getting that advice for your own resume, as well as scholarships. There is a way to plan for scholarships in advance to make your college essays work for you. I just met with a senior last night who's doing this, using all the essays we worked on over the course of the year and putting them towards scholarships that we planned out in advance. So there's a way to really intelligently approach scholarships to make the college process work for you.
And kind of going back to resume building, I think one mistake that sometimes parents and students make is thinking more is better. And that's definitely not the case, because at the end of the day, there's only so many hours in that day and so many activities we can tell colleges about too. So if like you spent a ton of time on doing 20 activities, but only like surface level, I guess I should say, like maybe you only spent like an hour doing 20 different activities a week, rather than doing like a few activities and spending more time doing those activities, that's going to be like way more valuable. You're going to probably have more leadership positions, more in-depth activities. And so those are things that we definitely advise students on, about how to kind of maximize their activity space too.
And keeping in mind that there are only 10 spaces on the
Mhm.
activities list on the college application. So that's something we keep in mind is how, yes, exactly like Lindsay said, how to maximize those 10 spaces.
Another big thing that we also help with is going to be interviews, and especially for like our BSMD, like direct medical, direct dental students, all of them are, for almost every direct program, you're going through like an interview process, sometimes multiple rounds of interview process. And so even whenever you're hiring someone as like a freshman or sophomore in high school, you should still be inquiring about like what kind of interview prep services they have. Is this something that they will help with? Is there a limit on how many, things that they'll help with? Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, that's definitely something you should also ask your independent college counselor. Like, what's the limitations of the package? How many schools can you apply with? How many essay revisions will you do? How many times a month can we meet? Is there a limit, and those types of things? Kind of having a good understanding of that. I feel like interviews, a lot of the times I've seen in other companies will put limits on how many interview prep sessions they'll do. Maybe it's just like one or two. And at Moon Prep, we're kind of different than that. And we will allow students to do as many interview prep sessions as they want, because it is something that I've had one kid who we've been doing interview prep for like the last like few months, even before he got interviews, just because it wasn't his talent, and he's really improved. And some kids feel really confident after like one or two sessions. So it really does vary on the number of sessions that you do. But yeah, interviews I think is a big thing that we will help with.
And then we also help with course selection. Really, any independent college counselor will also help with this. But especially for in the underclassmen years, it's important to keep your academic goals in mind as you progress towards them, to make sure that you are taking the right classes in the right semester, that you aren't, potentially pigeonholing yourself or cutting yourself off from the academic goals that you have. For instance, my husband he went through an engineering major, and he was missing a few of the classes for the engineering major when he originally applied to his college. So he had to be accepted conditionally, and he had to make a certain grade in those original classes. And it was much harder in his first year than if he just would have taken the right classes in his high school. Then he could have planned this out and not been so stressed out his freshman year.
Definitely. Yeah, it's like those things that you don't really think about. And I've had that happen for kids too, that you would have thought that like their school counselor would have been on top of those types of things. Like maybe they don't have like an art credit that they needed, or things along those lines. And so those are kind of like your horror stories. But course selection is definitely something we'll help with.
That's something I forgot
Now,
to mention in the difference between guidance counselors and independent counselors, is that in most cases, your school counselor is going to be focused first on graduation requirements from their high school, and then focused on college, college acceptance rates and getting you into the college. And that's where an independent counselor who specializes in the programs and academic goals that you specifically have can help you make sure that you're moving towards those goals with the courses and resumes that you're building, because it might not be the specialty or expertise of your school counselor who is making sure that you have the credits to graduate. They might not always be on the exact same track.
I love that. That's such a good point. Yeah, especially because like California schools are kind of different about what they require. Some schools too require like less foreign languages than some schools, like some universities are recommending. So it does kind of vary from place to place. So checking out your list, and that's something we can definitely help with as you go through. We'll guide you through that process. Okay, so next is kind of up is what does a college counselor not do? And I think the biggest thing that I personally get asked about is, will you write the essays for the students? And that's a definite no. Like we never will write an essay for a student. One, it's ultimately the student who's getting accepted to the college and not us. We want to make sure that the student's voice is ultimately coming through. So even when we're making edits to the essays, we're just making suggestions and comments at the end of the day. The student can accept or reject them because it's really important for the student's voice to come through. But it is important, like just for the integrity of this process, for the student to be the one writing the essays and not the parent, not ChatGPT, not the school counselor, not the essay coach, whoever it might be. So we do have the students write the essays. And of course, we'll help brainstorm, we'll help write outlines, we'll really guide them through that process, but ultimately the student is writing those essays.
And that's so important too, that we don't have the stories inside of us that can accurately, talk about their life experiences. So of course we're going to be there to help outline and pull the story out of the student and framework it, but then they need to be writing that first draft and then we help polish it from there. But again, like our life experience, our lived experience is not the same as a student's. And so the actual story itself needs to come from the student. And that's something that it's kind of impossible for us to do. We and we also don't submit applications for the students too. We cannot be responsible for like hitting submit because there's so many of those personal details, information that is on all these college applications. And so there is some information that we could potentially not have or miss because it's not our self, that we are submitting this application for. So we cannot be responsible for hitting the submit button for the students.
Like and at min prep too, like we will remind you of deadlines, we'll have spreadsheets of deadlines, but it's ultimately the student's responsibility to also keep track of those deadlines. Like we do expect kind of a certain level of like maturity and responsibility from our students and their families. And so we'll be there and like guiding them throughout that entire process. We'll remind them of deadlines, but ultimately if a student hits submit or not, that's kind of up to the student and their family. So we want to help them and we want them to get there, but we definitely can't do everything for them.
And that is so important because as you're applying to college, you're becoming an adult. So
Yeah.
this is a very big step of owning your own future. Are you going to work hard towards your academic dreams? And are you going to be able to be organized enough to hit submit by the deadline? Does this matter enough to you to make sure it gets done? And that's a very
Mhm.
important thing. Again, we will support you, we'll help you, but we can't do it for you. We can't care about your academic dreams for you.
Yes, that's such a good point. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
another question that I get asked a lot in perspective calls too is, do we have a network or a database of connections or alumni or something that we can pair students with research mentors or internships? And that answer is no. That is a definite, privacy invasion that we don't want to do. And also that we have students from all across the country. It'd be very impossible to cultivate a giant network that where we can just pair you with a research mentor like that.
Especially for like research mentors too. Like it just so depends on like what they've got going on too. Like they might not be like even if we've had a student who's worked in that lab before, there's absolutely no guarantees that they would be able to work with another student again. Like it just so depends on like what they're working on in the moment and what's going on in their own lives. And so that's why it would make our lives so much easier if like we could have this list, but no, we don't have it. I wish we did, but it's just impossible.
Mhm.
And then one last thing that I feel like we always get asked is, can you guarantee that I will get into my top school? And this is another Absolutely not. That is why, all those people got sued and got put into jail, is because they were making those guarantees about, Ivy Leagues and USC or whatever it was. And so any college counselor who can guarantee you can get into a school is is essentially doing something illegal, most likely. Like, of course, like we can feel really confident that you'll get into a school that's got like, an 85% acceptance rate, but I would never guarantee it to a student just because there are so many factors that we don't know. We've seen kids get rejected from their safety and then accepted into like their reaches. And so it just depends too, like on the list. But no, we can never guarantee you'll get into a BSMD program. We can never guarantee you'll get into an Ivy League or anything along those lines.
So if you decide to move forward and hire an independent counselor, I think one thing that is at top of mind for families sometimes or students is whether the colleges will know if they're working with an independent counselor. And I think across the board, my answer to this is always no, the colleges aren't going to know if you're working with an independent college counselor. There's no really like telltale sign that you are. It's just that the essays are likely going to be more polished than students who haven't had anybody look over their essays. But that also, a good essay also doesn't mean that you paid someone to help. I had really two seniors this past year who, I mean, I their first drafts of essays that they sent to me were so much better than some of the finished products I've seen in past years. And so there are like colleges know there are talented, creative writers out there. And so just because an essay is polished doesn't mean that you automatically worked with someone. So people all the time, students all the time have read really great examples on the internet, had their own ideas and written it and gotten into schools, their dream schools completely on their own. And colleges know that there's students out there like that. There's students out there that work with independent counselors to bring their stories to light. And they're not going to, you know, inherently know that you worked with a counselor. There's no telltale sign.
Yeah, because when you were working in admissions, did you ever like think to yourself like, oh, this person hired someone, or was it just like, oh, that was a fantastic essay and kind of move?
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I thought. And I mean, you could definitely tell the students that didn't work with anybody. There were not complete sentences, zero capitalization, no punctuation. Like, you could definitely tell the ones that sure didn't.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I read a good one, I was like, oh, that was a really creative idea. I loved that. Wow. I never thought twice about,
Mhm.
oh, maybe this came from an expert or not. I just was kind of enthralled by the story.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to like for parents to think about too. It's like it's not the admissions counselor's like first assumption to assume that like the really top students with great essays are working with a counselor. So it's definitely not going to work against you. But exactly as Michaela said, like she could tell the difference between a one that she could definitely tell when someone didn't work there. So I think that that's the most important thing to remember. It's like we are here to polish and help to transform what the student is already working on their voice and kind of make it better. And so ultimately, like our it's not going to be our voice that's coming through in those essays or the application or our personality that's shining. It's the students. And so that's ultimately the goal of like a good college counselor, I think.
So, Lindsay, what do you think is the right time that families should be looking to hire an independent counselor?
Now, this is a great question. So I think it depends too on like what you are doing in your own life, if this makes sense. And I'll explain a little bit more. So I've had like sophomores who've come to me with just like really thoughtful resumes where they have, started a passion project. They've already started volunteering. Potentially they already have like some leadership. They're like involved pretty heavily in some clubs and things like that in their school or kind of whatever things. They've already got like a really really solid foundation for a resume. They've been doing great on their own. They didn't necessarily need to start with us as a freshman because they were motivated to go out and find those opportunities on their own. So I feel like some of those kids, maybe like, by minimum junior year, like spring semester is kind of the ideal. So we can really figure out college lists and start working on essays and those types of things. So those are kind of category A people, like, kids who maybe do have like really strong parental support or like are just really driven and kind of know what they want to do. we definitely do have some kids who are just not as like sure about what they want, which is definitely not a bad thing. As a 14-year-old, you're not expected to know everything. You might have explored, you might not have like known exactly what to get involved in. You might not have had an older sibling or an older cousin who's gone through this process and not had like, that person who's told you you should be doing those types of things too. And so like if that's the case, maybe like a first gen here in the US of like no one else in your family has gone to college here in the US. And so you kind of are the guinea pig, if you will, of your family. And so having us to help you as like honestly a freshman can be really helpful. So we can help you take advantage of your summers from the beginning. We can help you plan like a passion project. And so, I think it just depends on the type of student, but by minimum, I would say junior year, spring semester is my ideal. Is that similar to what you say, Michaela?
Oh, yes. I feel like I get the question a lot from new families. Are we too early? I'm like,
No,
no.
you're almost never
No,
too early. You're
right.
never early.
Now, the flip side of that is it ever too late to hire a counselor? And I think, my perfect answer to this is just that it's always better to have started yesterday. That's the best time to start is yesterday, because really every day counts. It is not too early to start. We have a few eighth graders here at Moon Prep, and so it definitely is not too early ever. But as far as being too late, while it's technically never too late to get an expert opinion on your application, it's also necessary to be realistic about your expectations about how much a counselor or any sort of expert can help on short notice. If you have hired someone 30 days before your college deadlines, just be realistic about what can be accomplished, because there likely is not going to be miracles that can be worked. If you come even right before your senior year, like summer before senior year, there's not much guidance we can give on the resume. We're kind of working with the resume is what it is, and
Yeah.
we're going to work with what we have. And just realize, I feel like a lot of students that come to us later in the game, September and October, have typically front loaded a lot of essays. They've written a lot of the essays, so they think that they're ahead. But just be mindful that if you do this, if you front load all the essay work and hire someone later, there is always the chance that the counselor could ask you to change or rewrite some or most of your content. And so even if, especially if you're starting from scratch and have nothing, just to manage your expectations on what can be realistically accomplished in 30 days, when that counselor likely does have other students too that have been here for a while and they've been working on things, earlier. So just because like signing up 30 days before the deadline doesn't kind of miraculously make more availability during those busy times either.
Especially if, I mean, we've had people come to us written nothing 30 days beforehand. And for BSMD, as we've talked about, like a lot of deadlines are in the beginning part of the deadline season, like, mid-October, November 1st. It's a lot to get through. And so planning ahead is kind of ideal. I had like one, I think it was like a rising junior who like at the beginning of February was like, we're way too early, right? Like we shouldn't even like really be talking to you until like November. And I was like, oh my God, no, please sign up now, get going on your applications earlier rather than later. I think that that's kind of exactly what Michaela was saying. Like the difference between the ones who start early and the ones who don't is really clear, not only in resume a lot of the times, and that could be on your own or with an independent college counselor. And same thing for essays. I feel like essay work, the ones who started over the summer, they tend to just be like way more creative because we had more time. They tend to be just like more polished because once again, I know I've had kids who send me drafts of essays, a day or two before the deadlines, and we're just trying to get it as good as possible in that time period. And we're doing the best that we can too in the time that the student has given us, but they're not giving us a lot to work with either. So by starting earlier, you really can hopefully give yourself a better chance of getting accepted. So if you're listening to this podcast and like thinking about hiring an independent college counselor, now is really the time.
Yeah, the answer is it's technically never too late, because second opinions, expert opinions are always a great thing to seek out. But the answer is yesterday is the best time to start, no matter when.
Anything else you can think of, Michaela, about like what parents or students should think about before hiring an independent college counselor?
My last little thing is that I feel like I've been asked this a few times of whether families should hire someone local to them or work with a fully remote company like Moon Prep. And I always say, of course, like we want you to be comfortable with your choice and everything, especially if you're going to be applying to schools that are mostly local to you. Maybe that's a better option. But if you're looking to apply more widespread, definitely a fully remote company is perfect for you. And I'll just give an example of a family friend that I helped 2 years ago who was local to me. When it came to resume building and essays, we met at a coffee shop, of course. I'd already known her. She was a family friend's daughter. Great. And but we still had to screen share over Zoom to work on essays. So we would just go to a coffee shop and put our laptops back to back. And that is how we worked. And it was just kind of silly because we didn't need to be in person at all to do the work that we needed to do for her essays. We only met and looked at each other across the table and chatted in really that first meeting. And then afterwards, we jumped into essays and we would show up at the coffee shop and just have our laptops back to back and still be on Zoom screen sharing so we could see each other's edits. So there was really no reason to be in person. And that's just the reality. She came to me as a junior and, I mean, it was just, it didn't really help to be in person. And that's just sort of the reality of it.
I tell people kind of a similar thing too. It's like if I have to drive to a coffee shop, we're not meeting for 15 minutes. You're probably going to get charged for that full hour of me taking the time out of my day to leave my house, to, drive, if it's 15, 20 minutes, whatever it is, to get to the coffee house, the library, whatever it is. Like you're just going to have, like, I think a lot more restrictions on the time. So at Moon Prep, at least, like we'll meet with a kid for, if they needed a quick call for like 15 to 30 minutes, like we can squeeze them in a lot easier than if we had to meet in person. And same thing, the coffee shops might be closed at like 8 or 9 p.m. and we'll still be meeting with kids, into the evening sometimes. And so there's like a lot less, I think, flexibility on like the length of the meeting as well as like the time of the meeting too. So I think that that's like one big advantage of a virtual company over an in-person company too. If you want to work with us, check out our website, moonprep.com. But if not, we will definitely be hitting you up with some more content in the next couple of weeks. Thanks so much for listening to the White Coat Club. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit subscribe. But yeah, we'll be back in a couple of weeks with more BSMD and med school admissions content. We'll see you
Have a
next
great week.
time. Bye.